Hi guys, this is Professor Bryan Yves Araneta, and let's have the third lecture video of this series. Again, in as much as I want to maintain the focus of this presentation on aquatic ecosystems only, I felt that it would be better to include the terrestrial ecosystems because in one way or another, all ecosystems in this planet are interconnected. Let's have the terrestrial biomes first. Biomes are defined as large climatic regions that contain a number of smaller but related ecosystems within them. So we have the term climatic. So expect that each of these regions have unique climates and organisms that are well adapted to these conditions. For terrestrial biomes, you can look into their dominant plant life or assemblage. Plants are producers that determine the kind of animals that survive in that particular region. But again, it's not only the food, but also the cover that can shelter these animals. Moreover, plants can tell us about the soil qualities as well as the dynamics of water supply and demand. Temperature, rainfall, soil, and vegetation determines the biome. For example, the tundra has low temperatures of -26 to 12 degrees Celsius. So we expect ice, little rainfall, little liquid water to run the water cycle. We have this snow-covered topsoil, so expect small plants to survive this because again, there is limited amount of nutrients. Then we have the taiga. The temperature starts to rise here because again, we are moving towards the equator. As water becomes more available in the liquid form, it can now hydrate soils to release more nutrients. Of course, to support your pine trees. Now please pause this video and examine the remaining biomes. We will look again at each of these in the next slides. There are more than 8 biomes classified in this map. For example, we have a semi-arid desert, which is a bit cooler than the hotter and drier arid ones. Also, the boundaries between each biome, or every biome here, is also not fixed as the climate and the organisms living in them are also changing or dynamic. Some grasslands, for example, can turn into deserts. Or, your taigas can revert back to the tundras or vice versa due to climate change. Let's have the tundra. It's a cold and treeless biome, the largest biome covering about 1/5 of the land surface of this planet. The thin ice-covered soil is called the permafrost. That cannot support trees because large plant roots cannot penetrate that much into the frozen soil. Nutrients are limited because decomposers are inactive during periods of low temperatures. They only become active for 2 months in a year when the ice thaw and water becomes available to nourish the soil and the microbes in it. That is also the time when plant life can grow like grasses and mosses. But after another 10 months of cold temperatures, plant growth will again stop. It is only in that short 2 months of summer that the tundra can experience swarms of insects, increase in the number of freshwater fishes and invertebrates, and the migration and feeding of predatory and migratory birds. Now look back at the map. Let's look at forests as we move towards the equator. Again, you should expect more species. In proper order, next to the tundra, we have the taiga, then the temperate forests, and finally the tropical forests in the equator. The taiga is a forested biome dominated by coniferous trees such as pines, firs, and spruces. Taiga is a Russian word meaning forest, while boreal means northern. Plants living in the taiga are adapted for long, cold winters, short summers, and nutrient-poor soil. Because the leaves don't fall from the trees, the layer of good soil is thin. The cold weather again causes the slow rate of decay, taking it longer for nutrients to get back into the soil. If you look at the conifer needle, it's actually an adaptation to reduce water loss. Because again, these small holes through which the leaves exchange air, these are partially enclosed in the needle. So it can withstand freezing and remain attached to the tree. Now with a long winter and a short summer, plants don't have a lot of time to grow in the taiga. The growing season only lasts for around 3 months. Animals can stay in the taiga all year round, but they can also migrate to warmer climates in the fall and return in the spring. Some hibernate to avoid the harsh periods of the year. Trees that lose all of their leaves in the fall and regrow them each spring characterize temperate deciduous forest. Deciduous is a Latin word that means to fall off. These regions have precipitation unevenly distributed throughout the year with 4 distinct seasons. You have your winter, spring, summer, and fall. Now with only 3-month winter, plants have a long growing season. Temperate means not to extremes or in moderation. In this case, temperate is referring to the temperature. It never gets hot like in the rainforest or cold like in the taiga or tundra. Compared with the taiga, temperate deciduous forests have warmer winters and longer summers, and they receive more rainfall. Deciduous trees have broad, thin leaves with a large surface area that permits maximum light absorption. There is abundant moisture in this forest that can support microbial activity, and that makes the soil rich in organic matter. The leaves dropped from the trees provide a steady source of organic material for the soil, but again, when the leaves are dropped, photosynthesis also stops, and trees go back again to that dormant period. Stable temperature and abundant rainfall make the tropical forest the most productive biome type. Tropical forests have only 2 seasons, one wet and one dry. Thus, there is what we refer to as a tropical wet rainforest, which are characterized by long wet seasons, tall trees, and plants that grow year-round. Tropical dry forests have long dry seasons during which trees lose their leaves. Competition for light is intense in a tropical rainforest. Most trees evolve to grow as tall as 40 to 70 meters. And the treetops form a continuous layer called the canopy, which shades the forest floor. Now, if you look at the forest floor, it's sometimes free of vegetation because so little sunlight reaches the ground. But because plants compete for sunlight, epiphytes like orchids grow on the branches of tall trees. Epiphytes are not parasitic because they make their own food. Tropical forests have the highest species richness. About 1/2 of the world's species can be found in the tropical rainforest. A hectare of tropical rainforest may contain as many as 300 species of trees. If you compare that with a temperate forest, it usually contains fewer than 12 species only. Beneath the canopy is the understory that is made up of some shorter trees and shrubs. But you can also find their trunks and branches of the canopy trees that is home to various animals. Grasslands. These are obviously dominated by grasses. We have temperate grasslands, savannas, and chaparrals. There are actually thousands of different kinds of grasses that grow in this biome. In wetter grasslands, there are tall grasses that can grow up to 6 feet high. But in drier areas, the grasses grow shorter, maybe only a foot or 2 tall. Let's have the temperate grasslands. In areas where there is less rainfall, trees cannot grow up to maturity despite having rich and fertile soil. Grasses, on the other hand, can grow with minimum soil moisture, and even if grazers constantly harvest them or there are fires, grasses can regrow with ease. Wildfires play an important role in the biodiversity of the grasslands by getting rid of the land of old grasses, and they allow for new grasses to grow. Savannas are temperate grasslands that have scattered deciduous trees and shrubs. They receive more rainfall than deserts, but less rainfall than tropical or temperate forests. Alternating wet and dry seasons support large number of herbivores such as zebras, your wildebeests, giraffes, and of course predators like lions, leopards, and cheetahs. Because most of the rain falls during the wet season, the plants and animals of the savanna must be able to deal with prolonged periods of drought. Some trees of the savanna shed their leaves during the dry season to conserve water. And the above ground parts of grasses often die during the dry season and regenerate after a period of rain. Chaparral is a biome that is dominated by dense, spiny shrubs and has scattered clumps of coniferous trees. Mature chaparral is characterized by nearly impenetrable dense thickets that are flammable during the late summer and autumn months. After the first rains following a fire, the landscape is dominated by small flowering herbaceous plants known as fire followers. Deer and birds inhabit chaparral during the wet season. This is the growing season, and they move northward or to a higher altitude as food becomes scarce during the dry season. So you have here small, dull-colored animals such as lizards, rabbits, chipmunks that stay in the chaparral all year round. The Mediterranean shrubland contains more than 20% of the world's plant diversity and is considered a biodiversity hotspot. Deserts are not hot all the time. Temperatures may fall by as much as 30 degrees Celsius at night because the dry air is a poor insulator that allows heat that builds up during the day to escape. Desert vegetation is often sparse and consists mainly of plants that have adapted to the dry climate. Their leaves have a waxy coating that reduces evaporation, and they have few stomata that usually open only at night. The cactus is a well-known desert plant with an expandable body and leaves that can store water. Its sharp spines protect the plant from herbivores. Many animals avoid the heat of the day by hiding in small spots of shade or by burrowing into the ground. Others, such as kit foxes and some kinds of lizards and snakes, are active only at night when loss of water to evaporation is low. Currently, deserts cover around 20% of the world's land, but they are growing. They call this desertification, and of course, it's caused by different factors including human activities. Let's now have the aquatic ecosystems. On the geologic timescale, life seems to have originated and existed in the oceans long before it came into land. And water also covers about 3/4 of Earth and is home to a variety of organisms. The ocean covers about 70% of the Earth's surface and it has an average depth of 3.7 kilometers. The deepest parts of the ocean are about 11 kilometers deep. The water contains about 3% salt, mostly sodium chloride, and it's actually a factor that strongly affects the biology of the organisms that live there. Another important factor affecting marine organisms is the availability of light. Most of the ocean is cold and dark. This zone where sunlight cannot penetrate and photosynthesis cannot occur is called the aphotic zone. Because water absorbs light, sunlight penetrates only the upper few hundred meters of the ocean. The part of the ocean that receives sunlight is the photic zone. The depth of the photic zone varies. Ecologists recognize three zones relative to the ocean's edges as shown here. The intertidal zone is the area of shoreline that is twice daily covered by water during high tide and exposed to air during low tide. Farther out is the neritic zone which extends from the intertidal zone over the continental shelf and to relatively shallow water depths of about 180 meters. Beyond the continental shelf is the Oceanic zone, which is the deep water of the open sea. The neritic and oceanic zones are further divided. The open ocean is known as the pelagic zone and the ocean bottom is known as the benthic zone. Intertidal zones exist anywhere the ocean meets the land, from steep, rocky ledges to long, sloping sandy beaches and mudflats that can extend for hundreds of meters. Organisms in the intertidal zone are adapted to periodic exposure to air during low tide. They avoid dehydration by burrowing into the sand or mud. Organisms living in the intertidal zone must be able to withstand the force of crashing waves. Inhabitants of the intertidal zone sometimes arrange themselves vertically in the intertidal zone, depending on their ability to compete for space, their ability to avoid predators, and desiccation tolerance. They can either close themselves up in their shells to remain moist and ward off predators, but some are mobile enough to retreat to a submerged zone when the tide goes out. Larger marine life such as seals, sea lions, and fish forage for food at high tide, while a large variety of shorebirds stroll hungrily over the intertidal zone at low tide to get their meals. The neritic zone extends from the intertidal zone to the edge of the continental shelf of the ocean floor, where the shelf drops off forming the continental slope. The neritic zone is shallow, reaching depths of about 200 meters. It is a subsection of the pelagic zone and includes the ocean's epipelagic zone, which lies within the photic or light zone. The availability of sunlight in this region allows photosynthesis, which forms the basis of the ocean food web. The neritic zone is the most productive zone in the ocean, supporting more species and numbers of organisms than any other zones. Strong currents called upwellings carry nutrients from the ocean bottom and mix them with nutrients contained in runoff from land. These waters are rich in plankton that are consumed by many larger animals. Numerous fishes, sea turtles, and other animals also live in these waters. Coral reefs form in the neretic zone of tropical areas. These are very productive and rich in species like the tropical forests. They provide a home and protection for a multitude of marine animals. In temperate regions, kelp forests provide the bulk of primary production. Seagrass is also found in neretic marine environments. These flowering plants form grassbed ecosystems, and they help to stabilize the environment by preventing sediment erosion. They also produce oxygen, they store carbon, and they can also remove pollutants. The oceanic zone encompasses the deepest parts of the ocean, and it contains fewer species than the neretic zone. Even in photic areas, nutrient levels are too low to support life, but the total productivity of the oceanic zone is high because, of course, the ocean has a very large volume. About half of the photosynthesis that occurs on Earth takes place in the oceanic zone via your microscopic protists, bacteria, and algae. In the aphotic zone, animals feed primarily on sinking plankton and dead organisms. As you can see here, a dead whale is being scavenged by a group of octopuses here. Organisms living deep in the ocean must cope with near-freezing temperatures and crushing pressure. The squid, for example, have slow metabolic rates and reduced skeletal systems. Diverse communities also live near volcanic vents, 2,500 meters below the surface. The producers for this ecosystem are chemosynthetic bacteria that use energy contained in the hydrogen sulfide from the vents, and unique clams, crabs, and worms feed on this bacteria there. An estuary occurs where freshwater rivers and streams flow into the sea, forming a transition zone known as the ecotone. The mixing of seawater and freshwater provides high level of nutrients, both in the water column and in the sediment. So this makes your estuary one of the most productive natural habitats in the world. Estuaries are incredibly dynamic systems, but also difficult for many species to survive year-round. It provides critical habitat to a variety of species that rely on estuaries for life cycle completion, such as salmonids, your lampreys, and your migratory birds. Two of the main challenges of estuarine life are the variability in salinity and sedimentation. Many species of fish and invertebrates have various methods to control or conform to the shifts in salt concentration, and you can call them osmoconformers or osmoregulators. Many animals also burrow to avoid predation and to live in a more stable sedimental environment. Your heterotrophic bacteria or microbes, however, also deplete the oxygen in the sediment, resulting in a sort of anoxic conditions, and this can be further exacerbated by limited water turnovers. Phytoplankton are the key primary producers in estuaries. They move with the water bodies and can be flushed in and out with the tides. Their productivity is largely dependent upon the turbidity of the water. The main phytoplankton present are diatoms and dinoflagellates, and these are abundant in the sediment. It is important to remember that the primary source of food for many organisms on estuaries, including your bacteria, is the detritus that you can find in the sediments. Alright, the salt content of fresh water is about 0.005%. These ecosystems can be divided into lentic and lotic systems. Lentic, where waters are still, like in lakes and ponds, while lotic for flowing waters like in rivers and streams. All of these are studied in a more generalized science called limnology, or the study of freshwater ecosystems. Freshwater is only about 2% or 3% of all water on the earth. Of that 3%, if I'm not mistaken, only about 2% is on the surface ecosystems, because 30% can be found in the ground or in groundwater, and 68% are in the glaciers. Lakes and ponds are inland bodies of water or slowly moving water that covers only 2% of the Earth's surface. With this small coverage, they still contain the majority of the fresh water on the land surface. Ponds can be artificial or natural bodies of water. How large is a pond? One ecologist, Charles Elton, stated that anything less than 40 hectares is a pond. But of course, in our minds, it's a lot smaller and usually about 2 to 5 feet deep. But take note that it can go up to 12 feet. I think there is no fixed demarcation between a pond and a lake. Only that the lake must be larger. Just like in the marine zones, lakes and ponds also have the pelagic zone, the littoral zone, and the benthic zone. The pelagic zone is the open water area that makes up most of the lake's volume. The littoral zone is the inshore area where light penetrates to the bottom. This contains large rooted plants called macrophytes, while the pond bottom is the benthic zone and is free of plant life because again, light is very scarce. Ecologists divide lakes and ponds into two categories. Eutrophic lakes are rich in organic matter and vegetation, so the waters are somewhat muddy. This can result to microbial and plant blooms, and they will deplete oxygen from the waters and kill the other organisms that also need oxygen. And the dead bodies will again decay and contribute to the organic matter. So basically, if the cycle continues, lakes naturally become eutrophic over a long period of time. In contrast, oligotrophic lakes contain little organic matter. The water is much clearer and the bottom is usually sandy or rocky. Freshwater lakes and ponds support a variety of fish and other animals, including mammals, such as otters and also birds. A river is a natural flow of running water that follows a well-defined permanent path, usually within a valley or mountainous area. A stream follows a more temporary path that is usually not within elevated land masses. Water flows swiftly down steep gradients, and organisms here are adapted to withstand powerful currents. Some fishes have evolved the strength to swim upstream. Slow-moving waters, on the other hand, and their backwaters are richer in nutrients and therefore support a greater diversity of life. Rooted plants and the fishes that feed on them are adapted to the weaker currents. Streams are of course smaller bodies of water that have a current. They are in constant motion. Ecology sometimes categorizes streams depending on their size, depth, speed, and location. Now your creeks, brooks, tributaries, bayous, and rivers, these can all be lumped together as streams. Rivers are the largest type of streams. The Amazon River, for example, has a flow rate of about 220,000 cubic meters per second. Rivers and streams complete the water cycle by returning terrestrial rainfall to the oceans. Some of this water moves over the surface and some moves through the ground as groundwater. Now take note that underground water, since sunlight cannot penetrate it, cannot form ecosystems. Potamology is the science that focuses primarily on rivers. The characteristics of a river or stream change during the journey from the source to the mouth. The temperature is cooler at the source than it is at the mouth. The water is also clearer. It has higher oxygen levels, and a lot of heterotrophic organisms can be found there. Towards the middle part of the stream or river, the width increases, as does your species diversity. So you have numerous aquatic green plants and algae that can be found there. However, towards the mouth of the river or stream, the water becomes murky from all the sediments that it has picked up upstream. This decreases the amount of light that can penetrate through the water. Now, since there is less light, there is less diversity of flora, and because of the lower oxygen levels, only organisms that require less oxygen can be found here. Unlike estuaries, freshwater wetlands are not connected to the ocean. They can be found along the boundaries of streams, lakes, ponds, or even in large shallow holes that are filled up with rainwater. Freshwater wetlands may stay wet all year long, or the water may evaporate during the dry season. There are many types of freshwater wetlands, all of which have different names. These places can look very different, but since they are covered with fresh water for at least part of each year, we can call them wetlands. The two main types of freshwater wetlands are your marshes and swamps. Marshes contain non-woody plants such as cattails, and your swamps are dominated by woody plants such as trees and shrubs. There is another type of freshwater wetland called a bog, which is dominated by sphagnum mosses. Freshwater wetlands are the most productive freshwater ecosystem. They contain a wide variety of birds, fishes, mammals, invertebrates, and reptiles. Many wetlands are important as stopover for migratory birds, and they also provide protection for spawning organisms. Wetlands also act as filters that can remove pollutants out of the water that flow through them. Alright, that's all for this third lecture video. And this is Professor Bryan Yves Araneta. Thank you very much for watching.